He thought it was just another dinner, a billionaire CEO enjoying his steak in silence, hidden from the world by money and success. But when a black waitress slipped him a folded note, his life, and the lives of countless others, took a turn he never saw coming. Sometimes, the smallest words written in ink can change the course of history. The downtown restaurant was one of those exclusive places where crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen raindrops and violins hummed softly in the background. Billionaire CEO Richard Caldwell had eaten in places like this countless times before. He was the type of man whose face appeared on magazine covers and financial channels, always described as relentless, unyielding, and the man who built an empire out of steel and strategy. To him, this dinner was routine, another late night after a board meeting, another expensive steak ordered more out of habit than hunger. Richard sat alone at a corner table, his phone glowing with unread emails, his tie loosened, his mind already calculating tomorrow's numbers. He didn't notice the waitress at first. She was young, no more than mid-20s, with skin the color of polished mahogany and eyes that carried a quiet fire. Her name tag read Naomi. She balanced the plates with practiced grace, her smile polite, but behind it, her thoughts churned. Unlike many who served men like Richard, Naomi wasn't intimidated. She had worked here long enough to know that wealth did not always equal wisdom, and kindness didn't always live in corner offices. As Naomi set his plate down, Richard muttered a distracted, "Thank you," not lifting his eyes from the screen. But Naomi lingered for half a second, her hand brushing the edge of the table as if leaving behind more than food. She walked away quickly before she lost her nerve. Richard barely noticed until he reached for his knife and fork. And his eyes caught the edge of a folded note, carefully tucked beneath the bread plate. For a moment, he frowned, confused. Notes were for secret admirers, not billionaires having late-night dinners alone. He unfolded it casually, expecting maybe a clumsy attempt at flirtation. But the words he read stopped him cold. "Sir, I know you don't know me, but I had to write this. You built your empire, but maybe you forgot the people at the bottom. My little brother died because we couldn't afford the treatment. Your company cut his insurance when my mom lost her job at one of your factories. I'm not writing for pity, I'm writing because you can change this. Please, do better." Richard sat frozen, the words blurring in front of his eyes. For the first time in years, the steak in front of him tasted like ash. His heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know this woman. But her note had pierced through the armor he had built around himself. And as much as he wanted to ignore it, he couldn't. Something inside him had shifted. Richard carried the note with him back to his penthouse that night, intending to throw it away. But instead, he found himself staring at it on his nightstand, reading it over and over like an accusation carved in ink. He was not a man easily shaken. He had faced hostile takeovers, courtroom battles, market crashes, but never had a handwritten note from a waitress haunted him like this. The words were simple, but they clawed at the one thing he had buried deep: guilt. Years ago, when he was still clawing his way up, Richard had promised himself he would never look back. Sacrifices were part of the climb. If jobs were cut, if workers lost benefits, that was just business. But this was a human cost he could no longer shrug off. He barely slept that night. By morning, he found himself searching the company's records, digging into the policies he had long ignored. He found the truth in black and white. Tens of thousands of employees, many at the lowest levels, had lost access to affordable healthcare during restructuring. Naomi's note wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was evidence of a system he had allowed, perhaps even encouraged, in the name of efficiency. Days turned into a restless blur. At board meetings, his mind wandered. At luncheons, he couldn't eat. He carried the note in his suit pocket like a burning coal. His assistant noticed the change. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked one morning. Richard brushed her off. How could he explain that his empire, the same empire that had earned him the title of visionary, suddenly felt like it was built on broken bones. One evening, unable to take it anymore, he returned to the restaurant. Naomi was there, surprised to see him again. He motioned her over. "You wrote me this," he said quietly, holding up the folded note. Her eyes widened, and she froze, bracing for anger. Instead, Richard said, "I need to hear your story." Naomi hesitated, then pulled up a chair. And for the first time in his career, Richard Caldwell, billionaire, titan of industry, sat in silence and listened. Naomi spoke slowly at first, unsure if her words would matter. But when she looked up, she saw Richard's eyes fixed on her, his phone forgotten, his posture tense but open. So she told him everything. She told him about her mother, who had worked at one of Caldwell Industries' factories for 15 years until a round of layoffs cut her job, and with it, their health insurance. She told him about her little brother, Isaiah, a bright boy who dreamed of being a teacher but fell sick with leukemia. Without insurance, the treatments were impossibly expensive. They raised what they could, begged, borrowed, prayed. But Isaiah died before his 17th birthday. Naomi's voice cracked as she said, "I'm not blaming you for his death, sir. I know you didn't know him. But when I see your company name on the news, when I hear about record profits, I think about how a boy like Isaiah never had a chance." Richard's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to defend himself with numbers, to say it was never personal. But he couldn't. For the first time, he saw the gap between his world and hers, not as statistics, but as life and death. "Why did you give me the note?" he asked finally. Naomi wiped her eyes and said, "Because you have power. You're not just a businessman. People listen to you. And maybe you don't know what it feels like to choose between food and medicine, but you can make sure no one else has to." Her words landed like a verdict. Richard didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat there long after Naomi returned to her shift, staring at the empty chair where she had sat. That night, he drove through parts of the city he hadn't seen in years. He saw workers in factory uniforms waiting at bus stops, mothers carrying groceries in plastic bags, children playing on cracked sidewalks. And he realized, his empire touched every one of them. He had built a fortune on their backs. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to build something else. Weeks later, the world woke up to shocking headlines. Caldwell Industries announces radical new policy, free healthcare for all employees and families. At a press conference packed with journalists, Richard stood at the podium, his voice steadier than he felt. "This company has always been about building," he said. "But in building profits, we forgot people. That ends today." Gasps rippled through the room. He laid out a sweeping plan: universal healthcare coverage, scholarships for workers' children, community clinics funded by company profits. It was not charity, he said, but justice. The announcement sparked debate everywhere. Wall Street called him reckless. Activists called him brave. But Richard didn't care. For the first time in decades, he felt human again. Behind the cameras, Naomi stood quietly, invited personally by Richard. When their eyes met, she gave him the smallest nod, not of forgiveness, but of recognition. Months passed, and the changes began to ripple. Families who had once feared medical bills now found hope. Children who might have fallen through the cracks were given scholarships. Clinics opened in neighborhoods that had long been ignored. And through it all, Richard kept the folded note in his desk drawer. It reminded him of the night his empire had shifted from cold steel to living flesh. One evening, long after the headlines had faded, Richard returned to the same restaurant. Naomi served his table again, smiling this time, not out of politeness but something warmer. "You didn't just read my note," she said softly. "You lived it." Richard smiled, something rare and genuine. "You gave me more than a note," he replied. "You gave me back my soul." Outside, the city buzzed as always, but for Richard Caldwell, the world was no longer ordinary. One waitress, one note, one story, had rewritten everything. If this story touched your heart, remember, change doesn't always come from the powerful. Sometimes, it starts with a single voice, a single note, a single act of courage. What Naomi did reminded a billionaire of his humanity, and it saved countless lives. Now it's your turn. Share this story, because someone out there might need the reminder that their words matter. Subscribe to Kindness Vibes for more real, life-changing stories of hope, kindness, and second chances. And if you believe kindness can change the world, type "kindness wins" in the comments below. Together, we can make sure no note, no voice, and no act of kindness ever goes unheard.